I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Shekar, I'm really excited for this episode because I'm a little intimidated. You are a very smart guy. Your company is very high tech. Arrcus, you're the CEO, and it's 5G, it's networking, it's telecom, it's for really serious high-end big companies that need these solutions where latency matters, right? Total cost of ownership matters, high tech matters. This isn't just like your basic tech, right? That is easily replicable. This is very difficult to do, big barriers to entry, and a lot in the news these days, right? Everything 5G, geopolitical stuff. We don't have to touch on that, but this is very sensitive work. So, Sheikh, I really appreciate the time you're spending coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a kind of vast array of topics there, but absolutely, we're right in the center of all of that. So,
What is your biggest concern these days? Because I think you have a lot of them, but what's the one thing keeping you up at night right now?
well, largely, I would say we are at a point where there's probably too much focus on the one hand, obviously inflationary talk, on the other hand, recessionary talk, uh, failures in technologies, things like crypto and what has happened more recently to bring markets down. So just overall, I feel like there's a little bit of a pile of kind of pessimism and negativism that is riding just as we come out of a pandemic. And I'm an eternal optimist. I love technology, and I think there are lots of things that we can be doing. So my biggest concern is I just hope the world doesn't slow down because of the combination of these things, as well as, of course, some geopolitical tensions between United States and China and so on, in terms of how aggressively we can, as a globe and as a kind of humanitarian group, move ahead with the use of technology for good.
I'm surprised a little bit that you go to the macroeconomic factors, right? You talk about inflation and recession. I was expecting you to say something more specific to tech, something a little bit more micro within your industry. So it struck me that you're looking more macro. How are your customers, behaving around the macro when they see a possible recession? Do you get pushback on, hey, we're not ready to make that investment this year. We need to hold up. Our interest rates are going up for our borrowing. We can't afford this. Are you directly impacted by the macro more than tech competition?
Yeah, so I'll give you two answers to that. One, with me as the CEO of Arcus, and just as I'm sure your viewers may or may not know, but we're a smaller technology company based in Silicon Valley, and we're taking on the big behemoths. So we're taking on the Ciscos and Junipers and Aristas of the world, but we're certainly in kind of the startup ilk in that sense. And the reason I want to point that out is we are actually getting what I would call as a positive side of the macro impact. We have customers coming to us and saying, look, there are supply chain constraints. We can't get enough of what we're trying to do in terms of infrastructure, technology, networking, and can you help us? And sure enough, our answer there is yes, we can help you. We've got technology that allows you to go deploy, in addition to our software, hardware infrastructure from multiple different suppliers. That's what we do. We provide disaggregated infrastructure for networking. And so that's why I think it is important to realize that a company like us, where our business is in supporting companies in order to economically optimize their network infrastructure, we get the benefit of the macroeconomic environment in terms of what we can support our customers with. Now, if I were a much bigger company and if I were one of these larger companies that we're actually competing with, then the opposite is happening. So we've got companies where they're coming out and saying, look, we know we have to deploy 5G. We know we have to get there, but we're not quite sure about the use cases in terms of how we're going to monetize that 5G and layer on a whole new set of network services on top of that. And while we're doing that, we're not sure we're going to have the same capacity for capital as well as operational expenditure in terms of what we can build into our network. So the response that they are getting is a bit more muted in terms of saying, look, perhaps we're going to not go as fast as we want in terms of our 5G deployment. And that is very different from the reception that we are getting from customers in terms of where we're located, both in the infrastructure stack as well as how big we are.
How long can they delay a 5G rollout, a 5G deployment? Because at some point, if your competition's doing it, you got to do it no matter the cost, no matter the economics.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. I think there are also some sort of basic laws of, I don't know, macroeconomics that are going to lead everybody into a refresh cycle sooner or later. So I think, clearly everything is cyclical a bit. So the current macro climate will also vanish, and then we'll be back into exuberance in the next, 3-year cycle. So I think that you are seeing a little bit of an elongation of the 5G curve, but I think that the overall curve will still resemble what it has in the past, which is there's going to be a decade-long cycle of any new wireless mobility technology, and then overlapping cycles with the one before and the one after. And so I don't think this one is going to be any different. What is different, though, is unlike in the prior generations of wireless technology, where the monetization of that was actually quite evident in terms of being able to take consumers and make them pay more for voice and data services. This time around, carriers are finding that you can't do the same thing. You can't go to you and me and just give us a 5G phone and say, hey, pay us twice the amount because you now have something that says 5G. And that is causing them to then go in and say two things. One, how do we then go to people like enterprise customers, businesses, or even to consumers and offer them something that's net new as opposed to just bigger and better and faster connectivity? And then the second is on the cost side, how do we optimize our 5G infrastructure so that we can, in fact, make it equally or more profitable than what we have done in the past?
Where do you fit into the ecosystem, right? Because everyone knows, okay, I get my phone from Apple or Samsung. I get from Verizon. Let's here in the States, right? I go to Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, get my service. And I know there are tower companies and I know there are satellite companies, but consumers, the customers, they don't necessarily see your name in that ecosystem, right? You're hiding behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So how do you explain to your neighbors, let's say, to a normal person just in your neighborhood, here's the role that we play, even though you don't actually see our name?
Yeah, so the best analogy is really plumbing. And so if you kind of take it all the way down to the simplest terms, then I would go to somebody and say, look, you've got your house, you've got your swimming pool, you've got various things, and there is definitely a level of plumbing that kind of makes sure that everything you do works like clockwork. You don't really notice it when everything goes well, but you do notice it when something goes wrong. And so we are very much the plumbing underneath your 5G infrastructure. And so for a technically or technologically more sophisticated audience, we can then start talking about how your 5G infrastructure, yes, it involves your cell phone at the one end and then cell towers that you probably see. But what is lurking behind all of that is central offices, base stations, the giant World Wide Web, and then all of the wired and wireless connectivity that goes on in between everything. And we ourselves play a fundamental role in two components of that, which is broadly called transport networking, and that is routing and switching. And so when we get to a little bit of a lay audience, I would say plumbing is a great analogy to make them understand what we do. But once you start dissecting that and getting a bit more technical about it, you come to a point where you say, I could have the greatest wireless network in the world. I could have the most optimized airwaves on which I'm transmitting radio information from a tower to a cell phone. But if that tower is not connected through a really, I'd say, well-architected routing infrastructure, then all of the packets that are then transmitted from that point on to the giant web, in a sense, you could think about it as complete chaos if the routing infrastructure doesn't do what it is supposed to do. And this is just even talking about only the operational side of the problem, let alone the security side of that problem.
Right, right. Like the operational is hard enough, and then you have to actually secure it. When you use your own equipment, because I just want to give people a glimpse into your mind. When you're using your wireless laptop right now, your mobile phone, what are you paying attention to? Right? We all have the same device, but you're probably noticing certain things. Why is that latency there? How did this packet get delivered? What are the things that a normal person, at least who's a little tech savvy, should be trying to pay attention to get a sense for how your mind is working with these things?
Yeah, so when you look at it, and if you look at the user experience, even in this podcast of work we have going on right now, if there is, let's say, a delay in something, right? I mean, if my hand moves here and it doesn't move fast enough, or if there's words that are coming across that are a bit slower. So today, a lot of pretty much everything we do is digitized in a way in which it's then, converted into a bit stream. That bit stream is then moved over as packets from one point to another point, and the optimization of that packets happens in many, many different ways. I mean, some people basically compress those, some people send it through multiple different routes and break it and fragment it, and then it all comes back together at the other end. There are other technologies that lead to acceleration of these packets. So operationally speaking, what I pay attention to is what is the quality of experience of the application that you are trying to deliver on that network. Is it an audio application? Is it a video application? Is it a gaming application? Is it something where you're simply trying to do a banking transaction over the wire? And then appropriately, how can we, as infrastructure providers to this universe, give the right technology to the hands of the right service providers so that they can, in fact, make this experience even better than what it is today? And this could be, an operator like Zoom or Microsoft or Verizon or Google in the conferencing business. It could be a bank trying to enable online banking to its customers. It could be an autonomous driving application that we are trying to make sure that the car stops when it notices an object in front of it. So these are all different applications that are reacting and enabling something for us as consumers and users to do something useful, that all depend on the underlying infrastructure to react fast enough, quick enough, and with enough sort of bandwidth and latency built in so that the experience is valuable. But not all these use cases need the same levels of bandwidth, security, latency. And this is where 5G comes in, because it's actually phenomenally valuable, because for the first time, it now allows things like network slicing. It enables things like electronic SIMs. So there's a whole part of this architecture that allows for what I would call as kind of virtualization of the mobile technology that makes it a lot more amenable to better monetization for carriers.
You mentioned the autonomous vehicles example. That's a good one because it brings in edge computing, IoT, cloud, right? All at the same time in a very obvious and easy to see tangible example that anyone can see. And there's some real security risks. And if there's a failure, life or death, this is an actual life or death situation. So walk me through that example, right? When you're working with an AV company, right? What are the factors? What's going on in that conversation? What's in that meeting when you're saying, hey, go with us, not with Cisco, not with a Juniper? How do you make yourself stand out for the customer?
Yeah, so I think first of all, the people we talk to are typically the network leaders, network infrastructure leaders. They are then the party that provides or is a supplier to their counterparts who are either in the same company or or they are a supplier to another company, where this other party is the what I would call as the application user. So in an autonomous vehicle application, the application user could be, I mean, let's say a Tesla or some other car that's doing the same thing. Now that Tesla then depends upon what they would call as their network. So let's just say there's a CTO in there in any of these autonomous vehicle car companies. And that CTO then either themselves or as part of their team have somebody who is the leader of the network. Now, that network is today a broad definition for something that could be a combination of a company's own assets as well as some partnered assets. So network doesn't necessarily mean that somebody owns all of the physical infrastructure points that constitute that network. However, that extended network, both the company owned as well as provider provided network, has a very large, expansive scope for anyone who's an autonomous vehicle car company. Because unless you are geographically focused on just one city or one state, which is typically not the case, you're supplying your vehicles to the globe. They could be going to any part of the world and operating there. And you want the performance of that car or vehicle to be the same wherever it goes. I mean, the same rules of what you want the car to do in terms of recognizing people versus objects here in the US apply whether you're in India or you're in Africa. And so you need to make sure that your network is equally performant wherever it goes, and the same sort of latency characteristics that you're expecting here can apply everywhere else. And if that is not the case, because in some cases it's actually not the case, you don't have a 5G network everywhere. Some places you're still operating on 2G, 3G networks. So then you have to figure out, okay, what is my overlay optimization on all of this so that I know how and when to deploy certain things. And I know how I'm going to go in and expect certain performance out for my end user application, which is the vehicle in this case. So the performance is equally viable everywhere. So how do you do this? You do this again by optimizing your network. You go in and say, look, this is the infrastructure that I've got to deal with. In some cases, you might simply say, look, this application is not available here because of the quality of the network. You could do that. But in other cases, you might go in and say, here's how I'm going to load balance my ability to go in and get better performance out of this network. We do things at Arrcus, for example, at the level of routing and switching, where we provide for various levels of optimization so that the Arrcus software coupled with the underlying processor hardware, network processors, and the ODM boxes collectively can give you different performance characteristics depending upon what type of applications might be using that. And then even within that, we can also then tune and configure the router or switch to make sure that you're getting different types of performance, depending on what application runs on top of it. But these are examples of how what we do at the core and at the plumbing level then becomes important for people in terms of how they are stitching together the whole application, which then goes to say, does your car stop on time at the point of where it is in fact in front of an object or a person. So
it's so complex. I'm hearing you talk, and I think you need a lot of very smart technology workers. And we hear all the stories about how there's a tech worker shortage up until this year, and then they started laying off a lot of tech workers, especially in the Bay Area where you are. What is your view on that labor supply, that availability of talent? Do you think it's enough right now? It's not enough? What's your perspective on it?
Yeah, so I think, again, it depends a bit on the microscopic lens you use versus sort of how broad and wide the aperture is. I think if you look at it in the US in particular, I would say that we are going through a phase of large tech companies doing a bit of pullback, doing a bit of really reevaluating whether certain businesses that they are in are the kinds of things they want to do. And we've heard these stories come out of Meta. We obviously know what's happening in Twitter. So a combination of these things is leading to a bit more of like workforce coming back and looking for new opportunities, new jobs, and so on, much to the benefit of companies like ourselves, where we are on the growth curve, we are hiring, and we're looking for good talent. But this is a bit cyclical, right? I mean, this is sort of not really the way you want things to be. It would be nice to operate in an environment where the macroeconomic factors are not causing people to go and force them to look for new jobs. Now, in a more larger kind of time frame sense, I would say that technology keeps advancing, and so the skill sets of people in terms of what they do does need to keep up leveling itself. So as an example, even in networking, 10 years back, if you were a hardware network engineer, that would have been a phenomenal place to be. Today, many of the companies, including ourselves as Arrcus, really want you to be very, very good at software. And so that action has moved from hardware to software. And so accordingly, individuals have to skill themselves much more as a software programmer than necessarily as a hardware engineer. In yet other disciplines, once again, I think if you look at artificial intelligence, it goes from necessarily writing every line of code to having large portions of code being developed by automated means that are AI infused. And so what you focus on, etc., I think does need to have a constant refresh. And so I expect that that will continue. I expect the leadership that the United States has in software technology will continue. But I do think that we have to pay attention to both the local cycles of hiring, as well as some of the challenges that are faced by larger companies, as well as the reskilling that is needed to keep up with the pace of technology as we go forward. But like I said, I think we as a Bay Area networking software technology company are, in fact, I'd say secretly thankful for some of the pullback in the larger companies, because we're getting much better access to talent now than before.
That's what I was trying to get to. You finally said it. I was wondering if it was good for you or bad for you, but you said at the end, the secret's out. Tell me a little bit about this collaboration right now you have with VMware and SoftBank. It's helping 5G network operators reduce complexity, deliver new revenue generating services. How does that work? How do the three of you come together to provide that service? And what will customers be able to do?
Yeah, these are two separate things, and I'll also tie the threads together, but I want to make sure that people understand this in the context of the two separate things that we're doing. So if you think about what SoftBank is doing, I mean, SoftBank, for those that don't know, is obviously a large telecom company in Japan, as well as a large kind of financial giant. We're focused much more on SoftBank, the telecom company. And in partnership with them, we demonstrated at TM Forum at an event how some of the things that I just spoke about earlier can in fact be put into practice. So network slicing, as I had explained, it's the technology that allows for different forms of services to ride on top of the mobile network. So you could have a slice that carries, let's say, low latency traffic for gaming applications. You can have another slice that carries high security traffic for some banking applications. And then these slices are then with high fidelity transmitted over from the mobile network into the IP network or into the World Wide Web. And so in partnership between SoftBank and ourselves, we demonstrated this technology to showcase how this can be done. And this is actually quite, it's a industry shaping, and it's a goalpost moving event, because it now showcases how, like I had described earlier, the 5G network can be created to deploy new services that can be monetized in a really good way. Now, if you set that aside, and then if you look at what does that mean in terms of the compute infrastructure that gets deployed in these carriers and inside the data centers of operators, a company like VMware, with whom we have a strong partnership, always plays a very big role in the compute virtualization part of that, and even in the network virtualization at that compute level. And so for those that aren't that familiar with the technology, if you go into a data center, there are racks and racks of gear. Most of those slots are filled by servers, from folks like Dell, HP, etc. And those servers then need to get networked. And this is where, think about VMware as a software that virtualizes and optimizes the compute and server networking infrastructure at that level. And then we sit right on top of the rack, and we sit between the racks, and then we sit between the rack and the service provider on the other side. And that's where a lot of the Arrcus technology is. But if you bring these things together, you can see an end-to-end connection between what is happening within the data center racks, what is happening at the data center level, between data centers and the carrier. And that then gives you a full idea of when you want to go into a 5G domain, and if you want to create something like a complete network slice end to end, how our respective, I'd say, areas of focus, technologies, as well as partnerships come into play between companies like SoftBank, Arrcus, VMware. Now, of course, there are others that will innovate in different parts of this ecosystem. But right now, we're at a point where I'd say we're at an inflection point between the way transport networking and technology was done in the past versus how we, particularly Arrcus, are disruptively bringing this next generation of technology to the marketplace. And I'm actually super excited and optimistic about how this is going to lead to new application deployment for the post 5G world.
That's great. I appreciate you walking us through that answer. Multi-cloud networking right now is really starting to pick up steam. It's going to get bigger in 2023 here. What's your role in that? How are you helping companies navigate how that's all going to work? Because you can easily see how you can really screw that up, right?
Yes.
You can really go wrong very quickly. So what's your role in getting that right?
Yeah, so maybe before I explain our role, let me actually give a bit more context to the problem itself and why it's important. I think if you look at the early 2000 era, a lot of the action was on the private cloud infrastructure that was sitting inside a company's data center. At that time, I was at VMware, and obviously VMware was a big giant in that space. Somewhere in the, I'd say 2006, 2007 to maybe about 2020, a lot of the focus was on the public cloud and what is happening in clouds like Amazon and Azure and Google. And clearly a lot of focus there in terms of what the consolidated large public clouds have been able to do, the hyperscalers, for a number of customers. I think in the current time, particularly I would say in 2021, 2022 and onwards, customers are starting to say, look, I'm engaging with more than one large cloud, or I'm engaging with a cloud and my own on-premise infrastructure. What I need as a customer is I need the ability to have one uniform view of what my network looks like. And both on the operations side as well as on the security side, I want to be able to create and impose policies onto my network without having to necessarily worry about whether I am deployed in an Amazon or Google or Azure or Oracle Cloud or my own private infrastructure. And then, of course, there are other companies, folks like Equinix and CoreSite, that are supporting this infrastructure from things like interconnection, co-location data centers, etc. Now, what that sets up, therefore, is the need for this technology called multi-cloud networking. And multi-cloud networking, very simply speaking, allows you to do what I had just explained, which is have one view of your network across multiple clouds. So Arrcus's technology, and we call our offering in this space FlexMCN. So FlexMCN from Arrcus allows both carriers and service providers and cloud providers, as well as end customers, to enjoy the benefits of having a uniformly visible network architecture across the different cloud environments that they either currently use or perhaps plan to use going forward. This in turn gives them, I would say, economic benefits because they are sort of in control of the keys for their network. And they can then go in and say, look, this is how we want things to be done and to operate. They also have the ability to go in and create applications and services to a common infrastructure because they then write, for example, to the APIs that we, Arrcus, expose. And when you pull these things together, the programmability and flexibility that we provide, as well as the economic benefit of being able to distribute your infrastructure across multiple clouds, that gives them or the customers the best of all worlds. So they don't become necessarily, I would say, siloed in terms of just a single cloud existence. And at the same time, they don't have to deal with the complexity of having to deal with the networking abstractions that are exposed with multiple cloud vendors. So that's what multi-cloud networking is. That's what our software, Arrcus's operating system software in FlexMCN does. And it's I would say a pretty exciting and rapidly growing point of interest for customers.
I'm wondering, how do you price all of this? These different software solutions? Is this a monthly cost, or these long-term contracts? Is it per user, per device? There's a lot of different pricing methodologies out there. How do you figure out what's the right way to do this for Arrcus?
Yeah, so we're not quite there yet, but we are on the path to standardizing this in a way in which you almost sort of buy, let's say, a fundamental unit of Arrcus. And then the unit of Arrcus can be purchased either as a capitalized, in a capitalized form, or you can do a more, I'd say, operational monthly ARR-like payment to Arrcus for the use of that unit. And so what is that unit, right? I mean, our stack, we call it the ACE stack or the Arrcus Connected Edge. And the Arrcus Connected Edge you can think about as a collection of all the software goodness that Arrcus produces packaged together as this ACE block. Now you can then consume ACE in these units and think about the unit almost as kind of one point in the network where the operating system is deployed. And so for multiple points in the network, you would then consume or deploy more units from Arrcus. So we're trying to standardize our pricing methodology in a way in which it becomes simple. It allows our customers to go and really spread the use and deployment of Arrcus across a giant network across many, many points globally. And that would be the, I'd say, kind of end state or nirvana for us in terms of pricing simplicity, as well as for our customers. Today, though, like I said, we are in the process of getting there. Most of the time, you'll find that customers are buying Arrcus's technology in slightly more traditional forms, meaning they are actually buying it in the form of a router or in the form of a switch, and then putting that into the network. That's where we are today, but I would like to head to a point where it's units of Arrcus software that people are consuming and then just deploying completely in their networks.
The units, it reminds me of taking my kids to Chuck E. Cheese, right? And you just pay for units of each of the games, right? You buy one, you can spread it out however you want to use it. So I appreciate just you explaining through that this is a different way of doing it, because I'm not hearing a lot about companies doing this. It does suggest maybe a more modern approach for a company that's offering so many different types of services, and you don't want to come up with a million different ways to try to price that.
Yeah, and I should do a hat tip to Jim Scapa, who's the CEO of a company called Altair that I'm on the board of. And I don't know if he was the first, but I certainly kind of borrowed the concept from what Altair does in terms of units-based selling of their software. So.
Yeah, that's good. I see on your LinkedIn board member at Altair. So that's the credit where it's due. Talk a little bit about your expansion into India, right? It's a very different 5G landscape over there. You've had a lot of hiring. You've had a lot of growth there. Where do you see the opportunity in India for Arrcus, and how does that compare? Is it more high growth opportunity compared to the US? Is it just a bigger revenue potential, at least in terms of growth?
Yeah, so there's two parts to our presence in India. One part is obviously our engineering center there that's based in Bangalore. And so, not surprisingly, I would say there's some very, very good networking talent in India. I think the war for talent there is also crazy. So it's not easy necessarily to recruit and retain people there. But on the other hand, if you can do that, then I think the talent is actually quite exceptional. And so we've started expanding our center in India. I mean, we did kind of an unveiling of our new office, and we hired a person to lead the India office, Ashutosh. So all of that is actually going really well. We are just embarking on our sales and go-to-market presence in India, just launching that as we speak. And that brings me to answer the part of your question around the opportunity in India. So first, I would say, um, for various reasons, I mean, the fact that there is this sort of very youthful population in India where the demographic is swayed towards the, I don't know, 15-year-old to 35-year-old population. I think they have a really, really well trained and educated workforce in that space, larger than probably anywhere else in the world. Then the ability to now set themselves up for things that India has historically not been good at, things like manufacturing or things that are not quite just software and software related disciplines. All of these things are leading to an economic boom inside India, where the opportunity for somebody like us to become an infrastructure provider to the country is, I'd say, an immense possibility as you look at the 5 to 10 year cycle ahead. I mean, there is so much more development to be done in India. There is so much more infrastructure improvement to be done in India. And all of this is going to become a critical necessity for the country in order to support the economic boom that it will face as it goes into this next 5 year cycle. And so I see the ability, for example, for faster deployment of 5G in India, or for the faster creation of network infrastructure that enables low latency and edge services to be deployed, or faster means of road and air transport. So all of these things are going to require the kinds of things that we talked about earlier in this podcast. And so I'm a big believer in the fact that the country's infrastructure is going to need, is going to require an upgrade, and then people like us will be well positioned to be there, right place, right time, in order to provide our technology for that upgrade.
And then before we go, I just have 3 little quick hot topics that I want to get you on. The first one, crypto, right? It's such a huge compute need. The bubble has burst a little bit. Maybe it comes back. What do you think about crypto? Is there an opportunity still, or is it time for all the network providers, all the plumbers like you guys, to just move on to something else?
So I think, excuse me, I think it'll go the way of AI a bit, meaning there will be some cycles of up and down, and then some maturity cycles, and then come back and resurrect itself. I'm not a big believer that crypto will survive in a completely unmonitored, globally unfettered manner. I think that crypto will be useful technology, but it will have its safeguards. And so the next time around when it resurfaces, I do think, and I actually hope, that it is applied to more productive use cases, and that it does pay attention to some of the things that maintain global balance. There are country boundaries, there are productivity differences, there are currency exchanges, and the reason why all of these things have different values and then fluctuate a bit, and people make a living out of trading these things, is because not every part of the world is equally productive. Not everywhere do you have all the same conditions. So it's just not a uniform world, right? So expecting that we have like one currency that just circulates itself with like absolutely no monitoring from from government agencies, I think is a pipe dream. I don't think that's going to happen in the next, I don't know, 100 years. But I do think that the technology that crypto brings, the technology that blockchain infrastructure brings, these are all things that I think can be put to good use. And I think that there will be a second cycle of how that happens. Whether any of the current tokens and currencies will survive that, I don't know. But I'm very, very sure that technology will survive. So.
And then second to last topic, metaverse. Another huge compute resource. We haven't even got the bubble on that one yet. We're still a few cycles behind where crypto is. Is this going to take off? Is this going to be an opportunity for a company like yours as there's going to be more networking needs, or do you just roll your eyes and move on from that?
Yeah. So once again, I actually think, so first of all, I should admit that I'm not I'm not a game player, and I don't wear Oculus glasses and run around all the time. So
you and I are the same. We are in the same boat then.
Yeah. So I'm not as much a consumer of the metaverse as it stands right now. I actually find it quite obstructive to try to put one of those things above my glasses and so on. Having said all that, I do think that there is a universe where some of the experiences the metaverse either provides or has promised to provide are quite valuable. I mean, I can think about, underprivileged parts of the globe, countries that are not economically as advanced or forward looking as some other parts of the globe. And if you look at somebody that can't quite afford to go and even take an airplane ride to their neighboring city, or perhaps in some cases not even do anything other than just walk from one place to another, for them to go in and experience what truly living in, the United States might look like, or having a travel experience that is so real, informed by like haptic sensors and visual experiences. I mean, it is actually quite, it's quite exhilarating that can be done. So if the user experience can be improved, if the challenges around claustrophobia and things like that can be addressed, then I think the notion of what the metaverse can be is actually, I personally believe, can be very significant. I hope that once again turns itself into something more useful than just gaming technologies that people use. And so I believe that the metaverse will also have a cycle over which it'll come back with better forms of travel and education experiences, etc., for people with less obstructive or intrusive user experiences than they have today.
I agree. It's pretty claustrophobic. Makes me dizzy to wear the goggles, but I don't know what's worse, getting on a plane to go somewhere real or pretending to go there with the goggles. And then lastly, you've been so good answering all my questions. I'll give you an easy one to end it on. Whether we agree or not, geopolitically or not, this FCC ban of Chinese equipment manufacturers, network players, it's the law of the land. It creates an opportunity for better or worse. How does a company like you navigate that environment, which is very tricky, and try to figure out, here's the opportunity for us without inadvertently breaking a law, either through us or one of our customers?
Sure. I mean, maybe a couple of parts to that answer. So one, I would say, technologically, we're not doing anything that either enhances or otherwise limits us from application in any part of the world. And the reason for that is some of these geopolitical trends and waves could change. I mean, one day it's this, one day it's something else. So it's really hard for a technical or technology company to go and start building their technology to be just focused on some aspects of how geopolitical partnerships may be built or break over periods of time, right? So we are just like heads down focused on building the best networking technology, independent of who uses it, where it gets used, etc. Now, with that said, though, we are an American company, and so as a result, there are rules that we need to abide by. And so we are like super careful to make sure that the technology is marketed and it finds itself into the hands of people, and that we are always on the right side of what laws and restrictions are imposed upon us based on the geopolitical environment around us. We can't escape that. We don't try to. And so it's, I would say, sort of suboptimal in some ways, that people just can't kind of get along in a big picture sense with each other. But of course, we all understand the nuances of that, and what happens and why it is the way it is. And so I think we're as much a team player in that, as well as, I would say, a kind of a victim of the geopolitical outcomes, as other technology companies are on either side of that fence. So.
Shekar, I appreciate the time. I appreciate you going through all of this with me. You've got a tough job, but you can do it. I can't do it. You're too smart. I couldn't do your job. I don't have a PhD. I don't have an MBA. So I'm impressed by everything that you're doing.
Let me just say that that those are probably the parts of my educational career that I use the least.
Right? Isn't that funny? It's like, how many years combined is the MBA and the PhD, right? Like, and how much does it matter?
Yeah, exactly. Most of what I do today, I think I learned from somebody's PowerPoint deck. So.
See, that's the story right there. That's the Wall Street Journal profile of you, right? It's like, Shekar, I learned everything I knew to run a company from PowerPoint, not my PhD or
yeah, I was actually just remarking to somebody that I've just recently forced myself to start reading books again, because in the last 15 years, I've probably only read PowerPoint slides. So.
Books are not bad. I would encourage you to read some books. I've actually been learning a lot. I've been reading so many books these last couple of years. I think if I had read these books when I was a student, I would have been much smarter than I was at the time. It's funny how you have to wait to be an adult to figure out that it's actually time to learn something. Shekar, I really appreciate the conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.